And here we are for another Andor discussion, and we are here speaking about episode 9, Nobody's Listening, and we've got a very special guest with us, the host of Marvel Plus, The Daily BS, and many other things as well. It is Brett Scott. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing very well. I've been anticipating this the entire season. I'm like, man, episode 9, that's a long way off. Like, because we talked, I think before the season even started, about doing one of the episodes, and then you reached out early on, was like, hey, do you want to do episode 9? I'm like, sure. I mean, tentatively, it's so far out, it's hard to say, but yeah, I'm really happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. And obviously you've been on the feed of Comics in Motion before, and obviously you kindly had me on your show to talk about She-Hulk on episode 3 of Marvel Plus, and then you did a collaboration with Tonya and Spider-Dan for episode 4, where you did Marvel Plus, and also on the feed of Comics in Motion, where this will be airing. So you've already dabbled, and we're obviously going to have your more stuff going forward, and you and I are going to do more collaborations and things. But please tell us, with Andor, with the series, so were you very excited for it when it got announced, and then how have you been finding it so far up to the episode that we've had just watched?
This feels very much like my podcast right now. Like, this is what I say to every single guest I have on, as you probably know. It's like, how did you feel going in? How do you feel now? So right in my wheelhouse. I had no expectations going in. I heard it was announced. I wasn't sure if it even made sense to make this series. I'm a huge fan of Rogue One. But I just didn't see what story they could tell here. Like, I didn't like, how much am I going to care about this when I know how it ends? But you could say the same thing about Rogue One, right? Like, I know how this is all going to end. And I still count that as one of the best pieces of Star Wars media, period. Like, I love Rogue One. And then, so I went in, though, thinking, like, how important is this story to me? I don't, whatever, Andor, fine. It's more Star Wars, and it's in the same vein as Rogue One, hopefully. So I'll watch it for sure. Very quickly, they released the first 3 episodes at once. Very quickly, I was completely bought in. I was like, oh, this feels like Rogue One. This feels like grown-up Star Wars. Like, it felt, I don't know, it was a breath of fresh air. I've enjoyed the other series that we've had, but this one, for me, if it's not the best series yet, it's, tied with Mandalorian. Like, it's definitely, if it keeps up at its current pace, and the story of the current storytelling, I think this is going to be the best series yet. And maybe some of the best Star Wars content, period, up there with the other stuff that I really, really love.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's a thing that's been echoed over the discussion show when Jack's been hosting, when I've been hosting, whoever we've been speaking with. It's generally been, no one really asked for Andor, just like no one really asked for Rogue One, and no one had the weight of expectation, which I think is what Kenobi had, which what Book of Boba Fett had, which the sequel trilogy had. And the problem is, when you have that, already people's expectations are not going to be reached the way they want them to, in certain respects, either consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes it works fine, nostalgia and stuff, but other times it can harm viewership, especially with a wider range of people watching it. But with something like Andor, it's like, no one was really that fussed. So everyone went in like, yeah, I'll watch it. And I think that I said this before in some of my other discussion shows, which is, I feel like this is the series that the most amount of people who don't really like Star Wars that much would actually enjoy, but it's probably the least likely one they're going to go for, because it seems like a deep dive. It seems like, oh, you're hyper-focusing on one character, on one movie that's not the main one. It's not a Jedi, it's not from the original trilogy. And it's just one of those shows that I think every episode I'm getting more and more excited for the rest of them. And although obviously I'm a big Star Wars fan, I enjoyed Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, and Mandalorian. There were elements that were somewhat disappointing to me, or didn't reach the expectations I had, or were just, that was cool to watch. I'm not, desperate to watch the next one, because Kenobi, as much as I love him as a character, we knew that story even more tightly than this one. So with this story, I just found there was a lot more wiggle room. They've used a lot. You've got the Empire perspective, you've got Mon Mothma's perspective. So I want to ask you, when you watch this show now, and it may have changed with this episode, but in general, when you watch this show, what were the parts that have been really speaking out to you? Has it been sort of when Andor's been on screen? Has it been when it's Luthen Rail and his sort of two personalities he's showing? Mon Mothma, ISB, any sort of element? What about this show has been the main part when it comes on screen? You're like, oh yes, more of this, please.
Well, I very much enjoy the Andor story. I like the journey that he's on, and it's been wildly different throughout the whole, like his journey has been crazy in the short amount of time that we've been following him. But I wouldn't say it's my favorite. I equally enjoy all of this show because I love the jumping around. I think that's part of why it's such a breath of fresh air. It's not just hyper focusing on one person or even two groups of people. It's like 5 different storylines they're following. And like that's part of it. You never get bored. You never go, okay, I want to see what's happening with this other person, because you're so invested with who's on screen at the moment. And everyone's really great in it. Like all of the actors in this series are doing so well. And I'm kind of enthralled with every storyline. Like, what's going to happen with this guy? What's going to happen with, this person, Mon Mothma? How does this, like, how do we get to where we know her as later? I want to see like how it plays out. So the other characters are just as interesting. What's the character's name? Cyril?
Yeah, Cyril Khan. Yeah.
He's very, it's like, I hate him, but he's like so fun to watch, man. Like it's like this, he's such a creeper, especially in this episode. It's like, whoa, what are you doing, man? But just that in that relationship with his mother and like the back and forth there, she's like overbearing and like judgmental, and you can just tell he's been trying to like live up to some sort of expectation his whole life. And now it's like, man, thrust back into your mom's house, cut down in shame from your position of power and then sent back to mom's, like, ugh. And then to have her help him get back on his feet just has to like sting that much more. All of it is so intriguing, man. This is written really well from like every character's perspective.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's something that a lot of shows don't do that well. Like, I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones, excluding the last sort of series or so, but I really enjoyed House of Dragon. And when you have shows like that, which are, there's ones which are big in scale, like Game of Thrones sort of became because it's the whole land, but with House of the Dragon, it's more central to sort of one or two sort of connecting families. And with those two kind of shows, you have to have it so that each character is somewhat interesting. You have to be invested in what's going on with them. I think House of the Dragon's done a great job. I think Game of Thrones, in parts, were following characters that weren't as intriguing as others, just because with Game of Thrones, there are like 10 at once at some episodes. But with this, what I like is, linking in with what you've been saying, they're all interesting to watch in different ways, but what I like it is that it hasn't felt like there's a quota for any characters to be on screen. There was an episode, like each episode it shifts who gets the most focus out, like the secondary story. Is it Dedra in the ISB? Is it Cyril? Is it Mon Mothma? Is it Luthen Rail? It shifts depending on kind of what is needed. And I really like that element of things, that I don't feel like any aspects of other perspectives have been overdone as of yet. I've been really enjoying the amount that we're getting, and I always am like, I want just a little bit more. It's always that draw to watch that next episode.
Yeah. You mentioned Dedra, like that's another one of my favorite characters to watch on screen. It's just so interesting. It's like she's such a terrible kind of person, but you're like rooting for her a little bit. Like, I don't know, because she at least has more personality, or maybe it's her drive. It's something that you root for her over the people around her that also want the same things as her. But she's another one that's really fun to watch. Like, no one's boring here. And now that her storyline is intertwining with Cyril's storyline, it's like even that more like, oh, they're, all this stuff is coming together. And I'm like, at first, when we first started the series, I'm like 12 episodes. That's a tall order, especially for a series with not much name recognition. It's not part of the trilogy sequels or prequels. Really, it's kind of its own thing. It's like, that's a lot to make it the show with the most episodes that we've gotten yet, really. And then have it be kind of a show that most people don't know anything about, a character that most people know nothing about. Like it was kind of crazy to me, 12 episodes. But now I'm like, we're coming up on episode 10, and I'm like, is this enough episodes to tell the story they're telling? I know there's supposed to be a season 2, and I don't know. I don't want to wait for season 2. That it kind of sucks. Now I'm like, we need more episodes. We need a 16 episode season. Give me a Daredevil 18 episode season. But yeah, it felt like a tall order at first, and now I'm like, I'm not sure it's enough.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I've been feeling very similarly. As you say, when it was 12 episodes, I was like, oof. That's when I knew there were longer episodes as well, 40 to 50 minutes. I was like, that's quite a lot. That's quite, that's more than any of them previously, even with, Mandalorian were shorter episodes and there were less of them. So I was a bit like that. Exactly. And I was like, oh, they clearly have faith in the show. And then you watch it like, oh, where has this been? This should have come out before Book of Boba Fett, really. This would have kind of wrangled some people kind of back on the rails, I think, if they'd have seen this before Boba Fett and Kenobi. But if we delve into this episode specifically, so episode 9, Nobody's Listening, we don't have to go chronologically, we can sort of dart about as we somewhat have already. But if we start with the torture scenes, so you've got Bix being tortured by Dedra and then Dr. Gorst, and there's the sound of some sort of alien species that are like dying, and it's the children of those specifically, it seems, to cause some sort of mental breakdown, and obviously it's torturing them. What did you kind of think of how they played the torture elements of this episode, which I thought were quite well done for like something available for air quotes all ages? Yeah, it is. It's interesting that you can show torture and make it actually feel like someone is being tortured, but without showing something really graphic. Mm-hmm. Like it's literally, you're just seeing their reaction to what they're hearing. And it's like, oh man, they're being tormented. But they didn't have to show you anything gruesome. They didn't have to pull any fingernails out. They didn't have to smash any toes. Like, they weren't Reservoir Dogs cutting ears off. Like, it was just a sound. And it's like, and there are forms of torture that is sound. Like they use these type of tactics on people, not like the sound of people dying maybe. But, loud, very irritating sounds repetitively for hours and hours, like stuff like that to break people down. So it has its roots in like the real world a little bit. But I thought it was really interesting the way that they did it without needing to do anything gruesome whatsoever. And it's believable. Like when you're watching them, the acting, like I said, is so good. You believe she's being tortured. Yeah, I agree. And also it links in, I think, with Rogue One, because they had the Maw Gullet, which was that tentacle octopus thing in Saw Gerrera's hideout. And that was like a non-graphic way of torture. And you kind of saw someone interact with a thing and then see the aftermath of what happened afterwards. And it's just that kind of subtext of being like, you don't literally need to always watch someone fully get tortured consistently from start to breaking point. You can give them pieces along the way and they can put the pieces back together. And I think that links with how the show kind of treats its viewers as well in a lot of ways. Yeah, they do. They kind of, when they leave something, they don't always come back in the same spot. That's nice. Like they come back and you just kind of infer what has happened in between. And it works really well because it flows a lot better that way. You're not like backing up, going forward with each new character and trying to line up, like, is this happening at the same time as this? Like, it's just jumping in where you are currently. They jump into the conversation, they jump into the meeting, whatever it is, and they don't feel the need to explain every single thing to you. That's another way it feels a little more adult, right? Like, they're assuming the audience will get it. Much like episode 1, when they gave us no subtitles for the language. On what is it, Kanar? Yeah, Kanari. Yeah, they gave us no subtitles, and they never do, right? Like they never do tell us what was said at all in that scene, or through that whole episode. And I just thought it was done so well that you didn't need it. It was like there are silent issues of comic books, right? And you can understand everything that happens in that comic book just through the visual art form that's on the page. You go, oh, this is happening, this is happening. You can even kind of infer what people are saying to each other, even if you can't understand what they're saying. So they're treating
not only is it a little more adult, like someone got killed in the first episode, in the first 10 minutes of the first episode, which I thought was wild, like a point blank shooting. Not only are they doing that sort of thing, but they're treating the audience as a more mature audience. They're assuming the audience will understand things. It's just another way that it's made, I feel like, for a slightly more mature audience.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And it works so well. And I think there's certain levels of social commentary that come into it. And I know that when Jack was speaking about it last week with Angry Andy, they spoke about a lot of the social commentary, especially with the prison. So if we kind of get onto, because the prison, this was the episode, I think, that in the last episode or two, Andor has been on screen, I think, the most, but it's been a lot more divided of sort of equal parts other people. But I feel like with this episode, he had the first time in a couple of episodes, probably since The Eye, he's had the most amount of screen time in this episode. And that just delves into sort of the minutiae of what's happening on the prison. So how did you feel about the way they've been doing the prison so far in the prior episode and also in this one?
Okay, so in the first one, I felt like it was not giving us a whole lot. Like until this episode, you didn't get really how things worked. You got how the guards told them that things worked. It was like the introduction to how things are going to work here. What I love about this prison is, and this whole series, but this prison specifically has done this for me. I'm afraid of the Empire again. Like, they're actually scary. They're not a joke. Like, the stormtroopers aren't a joke. The guards aren't jokes. Like, when it's showing like Dedra in her meetings with like higher ups, those are not, there's nothing funny about what's going on. It actually feels serious, and like there's serious stakes here. And that the Empire, it knows no limits to what it will do, you know, in terms of like getting what it wants. And it's seeing the stormtroopers, like seeing the guards in that prison move people along. It didn't even feel like the original trilogy, where it's like, you know, like where they're able to be manipulated very easily, right? Because they're simple-minded, and Obi-Wan can say like, you know, these aren't the droids you're looking for. Like, I don't feel like they could do that to these people. These people feel like actual, like sentient bad guys, you know, like not easily fooled. They seem actually scary, and you fear for the characters in the scenes. Like, oh man, these are bad guys. Like, these aren't. People make fun of stormtroopers because they can't shoot and what have you. They bump their heads in doorways, you know. But in this series, I don't see any of that. I don't see anything that you could even really make fun of. Like, it's pretty serious. Like, there's not much really levity or comedy at all in this series, and I like it. I don't know. I don't know if I never had a problem with there being comedy in Star Wars, or, you know, in the MCU for that matter. Like, I like little comedy sprinkled in, but to have something really serious every once in a while, man, like that, that's another way it's more adult, another way that it feels like it's treating me to something I've been waiting for. Like, oh, this isn't made for kids, but I can also enjoy it. It's kind of made for me, and older kids could kind of enjoy it. But the prison has been really great for that, like making you actually fear the Empire again, and just what they'll do. And this episode got more into how the prisoners live with each other. So in the previous episodes, it was like the guards were telling people how, or whatever, they were telling the prisoners how things work here, how the floor works, and you know, like what could happen to you if you disobey or misbehave. In this episode, it's more like getting into the community of like how the prisoners live amongst each other and interact with one another. And I love Andy Serkis's kind of trajectory too, because at first he's very much at odds with Andor. He's really like a hard ass, and it's like, and you know, he's kind of about following the rules, because he assumes you do good, you get out, you know, you whatever. He's trying to do everything right. He's running the show, and you get to watch him kind of I guess he's kind of losing faith throughout the episode. He's kind of being worn down, and I've loved seeing that. And I know like people are like, how are they putting Andy Serkis in this again? Like, he's already been a character. It's like, I can let that go. He doesn't look anything like the same character. It's not like, but I love him in anything. He's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said there. His character, I had to write it down, is Kino Log, I think I've got the name as. And when I saw him in the last episode, I was like, oh, cool, Andy Serkis. I've never seen him do anything bad. He's either okay or onwards from then. Usually he's good or brilliant. And obviously his appearance in the MCU as Claw, I absolutely loved it. He's one of my favourite parts of Black Panther. His just interactions and stuff. He just made such a great villain. And when I saw him in the last episode, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. He's doing a good job. That's him.
Mike, I have to stop you right there. You just, listen, I don't want to call you out or anything, but I kind of do. So you just said, I wouldn't say that too many times. You just said your favorite part of the Black Panther movie is the white guy that's
Well, it's not my favorite part. I would say my favorite part is actually probably the music more than anything. Yeah. But no, he's okay. Yeah, he's not my favorite part, I'd say, but he's one of my favorite parts for how small of a screen time he does have, just because of his interactions and things. And he does actually make for quite a good villain, especially given that context of the film with how socially fueled it is. I think it actually works very well with that. But I see what you mean. That comes across.
I'm gonna create a clip of that one
and just send it across the internet. Spread mistrust along my listeners. Or it's like a thing of, you have to listen to this episode for the context. But yeah, with Andy Serkis, I found that in the prison, especially in this episode, he the way you could really understand him as a character a lot more, rather than, as you say, him just being a hard ass. You were just like, look, most people in that situation would just be like, look, I don't want any air quotes normal person if they aren't a crime lord or aren't a massive rebel or something. The theory is you go into prison for something, maybe it's not even your fault, whatever. You just want to do your time, put your head down and get through it. That's how most people would be. And you see him trying to do that. I don't want to cause trouble. I'm nearing the end. I've only got a little bit longer. Yeah. And then as soon as the system fails him, that's when he turns. And I think that's a lot of what this is going to show. And I think that's a lot of what's at the heart of the rebellion, is obviously the Empire came into being through not quite false means, but, Palpatine just slowly grabbed power, orchestrated the whole Clone Wars, basically caused an entire war which killing millions of beings across the galaxy just to get himself into power. So all of that, even put aside from a public perspective, just seeing this establishment appear, a lot of people in the early days of the Empire were like, oh, it's the same as the Republic, or oh, it's better in this way. There are some people who are like, it's fine. And as Luthen Rail said in one of the earlier episodes, the Empire is just choking us so slowly we're not noticing. And I think Andor is just in a lot of these places where the kind of choking point is just tipping over, where it's just for all these different people you're seeing what's kind of caused them to go over the edge. With Lieutenant Gorm in the heist sort of 3 episodes, it was because of his family and his partner's, I think his wife dying, and the Empire not really being there for him in the right way, and all these kind of elements. Everyone's got their own rebellion story. That's what Vel says. And I think this is now we're seeing Kino Logs. And I just think it's so well done, and you're so invested with all the characters in this, and it's something that Rogue One did so well, and what the heist episodes did as well, where you've got these characters where you don't need to have them just exposit dialogue about their entire backstory in their life. You just see them being them for a period of time, and you understand how they're all working together, how the characters work together, and you know how Andor is to a degree. So when other characters interact with him, you understand where they are in social hierarchies, how they are in certain situations, and it just brings such a more deeper level to some of the characters. Whereas we know in Star Wars, as much as I love it, especially in the prequels and things, you can have characters that come across as cartoonish or jarring. They don't feel like real people. And this is the flip side, I find. Yeah,
it's very much, as fantastic as it is kind of, it feels really grounded. It feels like ground level happenings. I like how we're seeing how everyone is affected. It's like a perfect series. It's in terms of like what it's trying to do. It's like showing us what it's like for regular people living under this regime. And how, like you said, it's like the frog in the boiling water. Like, it doesn't realize, that anything's happening to it, because it's like, it's just a different government in power, but everything's pretty much still the same. It's kind of how we feel when the presidents change, right? Like, it's like you wouldn't even notice it until you look back, like, oh, 50 years ago, things were quite different in the way, like the amount of power the government had and things like this, and like things that they could do, laws that have been implemented, but you don't notice it over generations. So this happening, it is a really smart series, because what they did is they jumped as if the Star Wars universe was real. Let's imagine that it's real. They sent in a camera crew right kind of as things were starting to be noticeably bad for people, and what really turned kind of this small resistance into like a large rebellion by the end. And it's like, I love that, because at the beginning of the series, it almost seems like there's hardly any rebels at all. Like, they're very few and far between, and most people are like, I don't want to get involved, you know, kind of like Kino, right? He doesn't want to get. He's like, I'll just do my own thing. I'll get by, get out. I don't care about this higher cause. Even Andor, right? He didn't care about the rebellion. He just wanted to get his cash and go and find his sister. Like, that's what he cared about. So, yeah, I'm loving the ground level stuff, and just seeing the spark of rebellion. Like, it's a really smart idea for a series. Like, it didn't even have to be Andor specifically. They could have done the series without it being Andor, and it still would have been great, I feel like. But he's a great character. He's a brilliant actor. He's doing an amazing job. But I feel like you can still tell an amazing story of the spark of rebellion even without him. It would be good on its own.
I agree. Yeah. It's funny because when the show came out and I heard about Mon Mothma and other people being in it, I was like, yeah, it's going to be cool, but I'm quite interested by Andor, but, you know, we'll see how it goes. And now I'm watching, I'm like, Mon Mothma stuff and the ISB stuff, and seeing the Empire's reaction to the rebellion a lot, because the only other, apart from like the odd comic or the odd book, generally speaking, the only stuff we've got for this era of Star Wars, sort of pre-Galactic Civil War, pre-Rogue One and stuff, is the Star Wars Rebel series. And I love Star Wars Rebels. I think it's one of the best pieces of Star Wars content out there, but it is aimed at a younger audience. The first series and a half does feel like that, but as it progresses, it gets a lot more mature, like the Clone Wars does. But even that is a much more of an isolated story. That's more about a family who are in a rebel cell, and they're just doing their own thing on their own planet that they're kind of involved with. And then as the series progresses, as the years go on, as it gets closer to the Galactic Civil War, they start to find out there's other people doing the same thing on other planets. And you see them very slowly connect, but that's from like the very outer reaches. That's on the ground level. They've got their own kind of thing going on, and they just occasionally connect with the wider rebellion. But that's only really quite close to Rogue One. And as you say, in this, it's just, there's the Aldani heist was like the big first rebel incursion, and that's the first thing, that's the spark, as you say, exactly. And linking into one of the points you made earlier is that the Empire is scary again, and when they showed the TIE fighters in the heist episodes, and when you see the Empire come into a city and people are actually scared of them, because there isn't a bloke with a lightsaber or knowing the Force or some sort of secret army hidden in the bunker. It's like they're just regular people with a fascist regime coming in. And the fear is real. If you can feel it, it's palpable. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I do like, too, how the stories are really starting to all come together. Like the revelation in this episode that Vel is like the cousin of Mon Mothma, and how, like, that was really interesting. I'm still really confused of, like, what's going to happen with Mon Mothma's family, her kind of, like, adversarial family. That seems to not like her at all. Like, it's an odd situation. I don't know. It's hard to predict what happens there. Like, does her family get killed? Does she end up having to just leave them because they try to turn her in? Like, how does she end up where she ends up? Yeah, because I with Mon Mothma, I know in Legends she had quite a lot of stuff, which I haven't really read a huge amount of. But in the canon, there's one part of Star Wars Rebels which we have an idea of what happened to Mothma. I won't say for people who haven't seen the episode of Rebels, that is. But you find out something major that happens in her life. But aside from that moment, and that doesn't mention family in any way, aside from that moment, there's no other time I can recall her family being mentioned. Now, that might just be because they partly invented her family for this, or in Legends after the films and things, who knows. But because I don't know, I'm like, it could just be a case of they go somewhere safe and she speaks to them occasionally. Fair enough. But as you say, it could be something more morbid. It could be they somehow die or they turn her in. And I'm leaning more on I think what they're trying to guide us with. So I don't know if it's more of a red herring from the showrunner's perspective, but is it like, obviously I think Perrin, his name is the husband. He's just every episode getting slightly worse. And so it's these things of like, are you telling us he is actually a bad person, or are you trying to lead us astray? I think it was Jack in the last episode, or one of the recent discussion episodes, and he said he wonders if the husband is actually a rebel and is against what Mon Mothma is kind of thinking. Yeah.
That would be, I think that would be a nice little twist, a nice little revelation. I can kind of see it happening, like I can see it coming a little bit, so it wouldn't be a complete surprise. But it's not like they gave it away or anything. We're just used to seeing this type of stuff go down, like them leading us a certain direction and then trying to throw us with a different, like a revelation that changes everything. But yeah, I could totally see that, and it would make sense that, like, maybe he treats her a certain way and is a certain way towards her, not only as like a facade, but also because he thinks she's the bad guy. You know what I mean? And then vice versa. She's like, yeah, he's not a good guy. He supports the Empire. So, it would be a nice Mr. and Mrs. Smith moment where they like find out they're both spies, and that'd be pretty cool.
That would be cool. I feel like I would probably prefer him not to do that. Although I just obviously referenced Jack's idea and things, although I wouldn't be unhappy if that happened at all. I'd be like, oh, that's cool. I think for my own preference, I do kind of want him to be the bad guy they're portraying him to be. And I kind of, in a sadistic kind of way, I want Mon Mothma to kind of have to suffer for the rebellion, because we've seen her in these lavish places and she is in a prison of her own mind. It is difficult for her in a lot of ways, but it's kind of that thing where you're watching the rebellion, the cost of rebellion. That's kind of what the show is about. And it's showing that I think the end of this series is probably going to be Andor's mum's going to die because she's getting old and she's a rebel, and she's probably going to do something that's either going to get her killed or make her ill and die or something like that. And so it's, what are people willing to do for their own freedom? And now they're realizing that their freedom's been taken away. So what are they going to try and do to take it back? And I think that's a through theme of this series. And so I'm very intrigued to see sort of how that kind of unfolds as well with this. But linking into what we said prior, like this being 2 series, I'm like, I don't want it to stop. I want there just to be 24 episodes, and for the next several months, I just get an episode of Andor every week, and then I know the end, because this gap is going to be, like, I love The Mandalorian. I thought it was great, but I am enjoying Andor, and I'm more thrilled to watch the next episode than I have been for The Mandalorian, aside from when I knew Ahsoka was going to show up at some point, because obviously the animated connections. But yeah, as you said, this series is just becoming, I think if it continues, if every episode's been as good as this episode, the next couple, I think it will be better than The Mandalorian. I've been saying to people, I think if you weren't actually that fast on Mandalorian, I haven't met a huge amount of Star Wars fans who weren't, but if you weren't, Andor's the show to check out. Yeah.
And I'll say too that another thing I've really enjoyed from the beginning, and I'm glad that they've kind of stuck with it throughout, is they have not relied really on nostalgia or big character cameos. They are bringing in some people that I guess like deep cuts fans would know, like Mon Mothma. Like no one else would know who that was if you haven't read a book or watched Rebels. Like you don't know who that is at all. It's just a new character. But they're not relying on Ahsoka to show up, or Boba Fett to show up, or Obi-Wan or Luke, or every other series has relied heavily on surprise cameo appearances. And this one is so good and hasn't needed to do that at all yet. And I hope they stay with that. Like, cause I don't really need to see anyone else. It's so good already on its own. And then another thing is that when you were talking about how like the series is really about like the cost of rebellion. Yeah, I feel like, and I think that's the reason that is why Andor is in the series. Like his little monologue in towards the end of Rogue One is like the entire premise of the series. It's like him saying, you know, I've done all these terrible things in the name of the rebellion. Just let me do this good thing. It's like that. Somebody saw that and went, we should show that. Like, we should show what he went through and what he's talking about, because it sets it up so well for you to do something with it, that the series could exist without him, but I don't think it would, because of that line specifically, a dialogue.
Yeah, I agree. And I do like the fact now that I'm watching it that it does have a connection to Rogue One, because you get to see certain things along the way. Like Jack pointed out in the last episode, which is Melshi, who's in this episode as well. He's in Rogue One. He breaks Jyn Erso out of prison, and he's there on the Battle of Scarif. So that's a person he's met in this prison. That's a little breadcrumb that you kind of get from that as well. So you've got this little thing where I think a lot of people like familiarity, but also a kind of tightrope to go on is we want enough familiarity so you don't feel completely alien and thrown in the deep end, but not so much it's something you've seen before. And as you put it, with characters like Mon Mothma, with like Saul Guerrero showing up, but not making a big deal about it, just him being in a scene when it was appropriate for the story. It's like, oh, cool. We need a rebel extremist insurgent for this plot, for this part of the story. Here's Saul Guerrero. He fits very well into this. Let's put him in. Rather than going, right, we need to figure out a way to bring Luke Skywalker into this. How can we write into that? And I think that's the big difference here. It feels, because I've said it in most of the discussion shows, but it's just that because Tony Gilroy has said he's not the biggest Star Wars fan. I think he likes the original trilogy, but he was never been this sort of fanboy like Jon Favreau or like Dave Filoni have been, which... With some of the shows they make, it works to know a lot of in-depth lore about Star Wars because it can help certain things. But with certain live-action properties, you want it to be the good story first with sort of a Star Wars skin on it. And that's how this show works. And I think that's one of the reasons it's working so well, because it's a brilliant, interesting, deep human story in Star Wars. It's not a Star Wars story that they've tried to make into a human story.
Yeah, I think it's... That's first. Like, the story is coming first. No big spectacles, really. The only thing I will say, the only disappointing thing that's happened so far is I was expecting episode 9 to be the end of a 3-episode arc and really, like, something to happen for our episode for when I came on here. I'm like, oh, episode 9, that means all these other ones have been 3-episode arcs, so this will like finish off a storyline and we'll get to find out like whatever, like a Prison Break, right? Prison Break's going to happen in episode 9 for sure. No, it doesn't, but it does do something big. It definitely tips the scales inside the prison. There was all these rumors floating about something terrible happening on level 2, I think it was. And at first, what's his name, Kino, he's like, don't worry about it. Just, it doesn't matter. Let's just keep moving forward. Like, it's none of our business. Don't even think about it. But then when he's confronted with what actually happened to the people there, and the fact that someone who was supposed to get out was just sent to level 2 and he's about to get out, it like really destroyed him. It really put him in that place where he's like, he's going to feel so beaten down by this system that he'll be forced to do something about it, because it's his livelihood now that it's affecting. It's his life, and it was just done really well. Like, because very quickly his character went from this perspective to this new perspective, and so as much as I wanted like a big crazy Prison Break episode, it was a great way to end the episode with like, oh, this is what changes him. This is what gets him on board with a prison break that we know is going to happen. Like, something is going to happen where they break out of prison. But yeah, the whole thing with the old man not being able to keep up, and then him dying, and then finding out about level 2, and then the atrocities that they're visiting on the prisoners there. It's like, it's all coming together. And this is just one little, like we were talking about earlier, like this is just one little tiny story of one straw that broke one camel's back. But there's like, millions across this galaxy of like little things that are happening. We're just seeing Andor's like stories of, people he comes in contact with, that his perspective of the spark of rebellion, but how much is going on throughout the entire galaxy? You know, somewhere, you know, there's a little Luke Skywalker, and he's hearing things, or he's going to start to hear things soon about what's going on with this rebellion. And, you know, this is where it all started. It's really cool to see the beginnings of people changing their mindset on, like, their overlords.
Yeah, like how a war starts and how a shift in public consciousness occurs. Like how much pressure do you have to put on a populace for them to start really considering becoming martyrs for the hope that things will change for others? And that's what it slowly becomes. And it's with the prison story, as you said, when you see the turn and you see the kind of loss in the faith of an establishment, that's one little piece of the empire, which you're like, oh, one of the arguments for the empire, as an example, is, oh, it brings peace and order. You know, people who do bad things, who steal, for example, or kill people, in theory, they're being put to prison and they're being treated, one would hope, in the Star Wars universe, you would think, oh, fairly. You know, the empire are bad, but they've got a lot more security. They're, you know, getting a lot more air quotes bad guys. And then you see what they're doing in the prisons. You're like, this isn't humane. This isn't what is kind of advertised in a way. It's a part which is like, yeah, they lied about getting someone out and then decide to execute like 50 people just to cover up their own back. And it's like, there's those announcement alarms that come up. And one of them says, if you don't follow orders, we're just going to activate floors and not tell you. And it's like, that is horrendous. That is
terrifying.
Like, yeah. And that's a very scary prison, as thinking in with one of the things you said earlier, is that it makes you fear the empire again. And this kind of prison is it's a dystopian prison.
Yeah. Maybe fear the empire more than I ever have, because I mean, obviously I was a little older. I was a kid, but the movies had been out for a long time when I saw the original trilogy. So it's a little campy. It's a little silly, even though it's supposed to be. I'm sure people who saw it in 1977, if you were a 6-year-old kid watching it in the theater, you were terrified by Darth Vader and the stormtroopers. But, you know, as an older kid watching a 70s film, it was like, okay, I get that they're supposed to be scary, but I'm not actually feeling any terror here. But now I'm actually feeling like, man, these are really great antagonists. Like, this is, and I always thought of it, you know, Star Wars was very much the only kind of problem I had with it. It was a little too black and white. There wasn't enough like real life injected into it. It wasn't like gray characters like they have, like, or people like, you know, interesting characters. It was very much, everyone was like surface level characters, and it was black and white. They were either good or evil. You know, we didn't care about their motivations. Their motivation was just do good, do evil. That's it. And now we're actually getting some depth in the characters in Star Wars. And this series, I think it started with Rogue One. It really did, in terms of depth, because even the sequel trilogy and stuff, it still went along the lines of, it was a little better in terms of character development and stuff like that. But it was still very much light and dark, good and bad. And this world, the like, I guess the like Rogue One world of Star Wars has been very realistic, very human stories, and just kind of, you know, gritty, grimy. It feels real. It doesn't feel like Andor himself. He's very much like, he's not the hero, you know, but he's also like a decent person, you know what I mean? But he's not some great guy, and he's not out to save people. Like, that's not what he's there for. Like, he's kind of looking out for number one. I think some of the best hero stories start out like that. You know, they start out with a person like, I'm not going to get involved. I just want to take care of number one. And something comes along and affects them that makes them want to help other people. So it's been really good for that. This series has been really kind of breaking the mold. This and Rogue One kind of broke the mold of like, it's all light versus dark, good versus bad, and kind of gave everything a lot more depth.
Yeah, completely. I really like it when you have the sort of moral ambiguity when it comes to certain actions, and they really played with that when they did the car bomb stuff in the earlier episodes. That was quite a move that can be considered people, terrorists do that kind of thing. And it's, so with that social commentary, it's been like, look, these are the good guys using tactics we've seen in real life, air quotes, bad people use, as the media spins it. And so when you get these kind of, what justifies the means. And I think another thing that Andor's trying to show is what ends up turning survival into rebellion. How far do you have to get pushed to be able to survive? Like with Kino in the prison, he's just like, I'm dealing with all this horrible stuff because at the end of it, I will be free. And then when you take that away, the freedom, you're like, well, why would I be compliant if you've taken away the only thing I could have? And that's kind of what one of Palpatine's biggest failures was he was always trying to be like, hope is the problem. You give people hope and then they'll rebel and that sort of thing. But the problem is actually if you take away someone's hope, you take away anything they have, you get people who are willing to just give up anything for the cause. If there's a chance someone else might have a slightly better quality of life and you have nothing and no chance, you will rebel. You will do these things that are extreme missions that sound like suicidal missions that are the kind of things that end up beating the Empire. And it's so well done of these, these ground level people that aren't symbols. Han Solo, Princess or General Leia, and Luke Skywalker. You've got a Jedi who is, the only one of a generation. You've got a pilot who's already, or a smuggler pilot who's already got a massive reputation, and also he's got like a Wookiee pal with him. And then you've got someone who's born a princess who has formal education and all these things, and then becomes a leader of the rebellion. Three big symbolic people inside and outside of Star Wars. So when you have them, when you follow them through these movies, it's these big giant things that they're doing. And as you say, they're kind of this, they're good or they're bad or they're this. Whereas in Andor, it's like people, when they aren't given special powers or born into this degree of privilege like Leia was, don't have the option so clearly. And even with people like Mon Mothma, she wasn't born a princess, she's a senator. She has to work to be in the political sphere. And so with her side of things as well, you're getting into the inner workings of what festered to create the Galactic Civil War, what actually caused that from people down the ground, from the Empire side, what they were doing to the galaxy, from Mon Mothma's side, from how she lost faith in the Senate, and that's why she decided to go for military action. It's all of these parts of Star Wars that, interestingly enough, I'm surprised haven't actually been tackled before Rogue One. And Rogue One was kind of, because it was deeply connected to the Death Star and the story of Jyn and Galen Erso, it was kind of like, here's plot hole filling, here's lots of really cool, interesting characters, but here's the end goal. You kind of see these people. Jyn has a little bit of a journey, but most of the people in there have already been set in their minds. And this is like, let's take steps back even further than that. Let's see what would make someone be willing to go on the Rogue One mission. Yeah.
They, okay, so you're talking about how everything was like really big, right? You have the princess, you have a smuggler, you have this Jedi, and how what these people are doing, like the car bomb, for instance, is like what, I don't know, our governments would call terrorism. And I love that this series like examines that in a way that, like, I love that they do show the Empire's perspective on that as well. Not that, I don't think they show it in a way where you're like really buying into like, well, is it really wrong or not? Because we are kind of on the side of the rebellion going in. But it's interesting that they show it because it all depends what side of a story you're on, what story you've been told, that determines if something's terrorism or a rebellion, or a freedom fighter or a terrorist, right? Like, that's the thing. In one part of the world, you might consider someone a freedom fighter. In another part of the world, you might say they're a terrible human being. They're a terrorist. They're evil. And on the other side, maybe the Western governments are the Empire. Like, from their perspective, we're the Empire. So I like that. I like that it's, like I said, it's feeling much more realistic than any Star Wars before it, really.
Yeah, it is. And it's even down to things like, we'll start to wrap up here, but it's even down to things like the smaller scale, like Cyril and his mum, and the mum that's, criticizing him constantly. And then as soon as he's got a promotion, oh yeah, I knew you could do it. It's a great thing. And it's just all of the characters in this, you don't necessarily sympathize with them fully, but it's kind of like you see why they are the way they are. You see the reason why Cyril's become obsessed with these things, because his friends died in something where he was actually following the rules and wasn't taken seriously about this thing. And he's going to be proven right. He is, as we know, that's one of the reasons us as viewers want to see more of Cyril, because we're like, well, he is right about this.
Yeah, he is right.
He's a sniveling character, and I wouldn't like him as a person to meet, but as a antagonist, and as the kind of individuals who the Empire, who become a part of a machine like the Empire, why do they sort of support this regime when someone is clearly an intelligent individual? And you see why. You see there's people who are obsessed with gaining power. Other people just want what they believe is justice, and the government in power enlists what justice is, so therefore they follow it. So it's just all the different characters and the perspectives and the people. It's just all done so masterfully. And it's something that's been echoed in all these discussions, which is the writing is just so well done. It's just something that in every part of this, every different scene and planet it goes to, there's just something more interesting that you can kind of take apart. So as we kind of wrap up here, are there any sort of mentions in this episode that we have not yet tackled?
I don't know. I think we tackled the big ones. The only one that I thought we might accidentally skip over was Vel being the cousin of Mon Mothma. So yeah, I don't think so. I do wonder about the 3-episode arc thing, right? Like, what happened to that? I thought that's what we were doing here. Like, is it a 4-episode arc, or are they just going to make this like 6 episodes that just kind of roll together? I don't know. Had you heard that it was like they were doing 3-episode arcs, or was that just kind of the understanding of people watching it that were like, oh, this is probably what they're doing?
I think there was something vaguely said that that's the general idea of the 12 episodes, because there are going to be a degree of time jumps as well. I don't know if there's going to be any more in this series, but I know in the next series they've said they're planning. I think it was this series is the first year, and then the next series is going to be sort of jumping every few episodes. So I think maybe the second series is going to be more concreted, but it kind of felt like episode 7, the announcement, was kind of like a stepping stone one, because now this seems like the prison trilogy, and then
I guess you're right.
The finale might just be like a 2-parter. So I think that's probably where they're going to be going. But yes, as you say, it is an interesting part. But I think in the second series it's going to be a lot more 3 episodes to be specific in that. So I had heard the same thing.
Yeah, I like it like that. I really do. I'm glad that, you know, some of these other series, they didn't do that. Like Mandalorian's very much one-off episodes. It's loosely connected. It's kind of like watching the MCU. It's like it's loosely connected, and then in the final episode or 2, it really comes together. But throughout it, it's really much like almost like anthology. You're like just watching different stories with this person, different adventures that they go on, and then eventually it comes together. Whereas this one is actually telling full-on small stories from beginning to end, and then starting a new story. And I just think that's so much. It makes for much better storytelling, and you can dive in way deeper on the individual characters if you get 3 episodes with them, right? Like the Heist trilogy, right? Like if we would have done that in 1 episode, it would have sucked. It would have been terrible. Like you wouldn't have gotten to know or cared about any of the motivations of anyone there. And this is the way to do it, man. If you're going to do something, like, do it. Comic books had it right from the beginning. It's like you do 3 to 6 arc, like, episode or issue story arcs. That's how you tell a good story. You can't really knock it out in a one shot. One shots, they can be good, but it's kind of rare. Or you got to be a really long one shot, like The Werewolf by Night, right? A longer one shot. So, yeah, I dig it, man. I'm loving it.
I agree with what you said there completely. It's like, I do like Mandalorian, but the problem is when you present a problem and the problem gets solved by the end of the episode, the amount of time stewing on said problem is lower, and getting to know, as you say, the environments and the characters and the things involved with that air quotes mission, you can't get into that as much. But in this show, you're getting your time with it a lot more. And that's what really works.
And you're waiting. You're waiting for the next episode. Mandalorian feels like, oh, they wrapped up a story. Next week they'll tell me a new one, but you're not like on the edge of your seat. Like, what's the new story going to be? Where on this show, you're like, how's this going to play out? You know? So I just think it makes for better serial storytelling too, like to have people wanting to see the next episode rather than just like, give it to me whenever.
Yeah, exactly. It encourages the consciousness to everyone to talk about it and to be like, oh yeah, what's going to happen next? Whereas Mando is like, what's going to happen next? No idea. It could be literally anything. Yeah. And it's, as you say, with the one-shot comics, I'll quickly mention as well, as I found with a lot of the Star Wars comics I've read and a lot of the Marvel ones too, is one-shots are very rarely great. There are a couple. Most of the time they're okay. Or it's like filler, that's a cool idea. And then it often connects to, say, another story. It's like an in-between between two runs or something. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I read that. But I don't think there's any one-shots I've read that are like essential reads, that you read them and go, God, I don't know how we would have survived without that one-shot. It's always just like, yeah, that was a cool little add-on, but you can't, especially when it's, as you say, a normal-sized comic, when it's like 19 or 20 pages, you can't really introduce and finish a problem in such a short space of time, unless it's a serialized thing, like Spider-Man, Villain of the Week, that sort of thing, but you don't need to spend time explaining where we are or what's happening. Whereas in a one-shot, it's normally like, what era of this character's life is it? Or where is this falling in whatever universe it is? Whereas... So it is slightly different there.
I would never recommend a one shot to someone. Like I'm always recommending runs, right? Like, you got to read this guy's interpretation of Daredevil or this person's interpretation of the X-Men. But you're never like you have to read issue 357. It's the greatest issue that's ever been. What happens in it? Well, you just have to read it, man. It's real quick though. So. Yeah,
you're completely right there. This has been absolutely fantastic. So please tell everyone where they can find you on your various podcasts. I'll include links in the description and whatnot. But please, tell everyone where they can find you and anything else you wanted to add.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I love talking to you, man, because the conversation flows back and forth really well, except for when I stumble and forget what I was going to say.
That's what editing's for. It's okay.
But other than that, it's been a great conversation again. I loved having you on my show. I hope to have you back again on there soon. But thanks for having me, because I don't often get to talk anything except Marvel stuff. Like I go on other podcasts, but it's usually Marvel related because, my most listened to podcast, the one that people most know me for, is Marvel Plus, where I talk about the Disney Plus Marvel series week to week with new guests. So there's my plug for that. Go check out Marvel Plus. I basically talk about every episode of the Disney Plus series as it comes out week to week. And I try to bring on new interesting people or returning interesting people to break down those episodes with me and discuss them and a lot more. But yeah, it's really a treat to be able to talk about something with someone that is not just Marvel. It's been a lot of fun. Other places you could follow me, I do like to talk about other stuff. I definitely like to discuss other things, movies, entertainment, pop culture, all types of stuff. You can follow me on YouTube and or my podcast, Daily BS. You can find that, like I said, the YouTube is the video version of the Daily BS podcast, basically. But there's everything on there. I'm talking movies, trailers, just personal opinion on things, comic books. It runs the gamut. I talk about everything over there. So you can follow me over there. And then that's it. That's all I'm going to plug for now. Because I have a million podcasts and a million other things that I do. But essentially, those represent a good portion of who I am. So go check those out. And those will lead you other places if you want to continue listening to what I do.
And I do encourage people to listen to both Marvel Plus and also to Daily BS. The great thing about Daily BS is it's the kind of podcast, a bit like Genuine Chit-Chat, where you subscribe or follow the feed. And then you may not want to listen to every episode that comes out, but there's always something that's interesting. And most of the episodes are like 10 to 20 minutes. So they're really easy to digest as well. So I would encourage people to check out Daily BS. It is a lot of fun. And obviously Marvel Plus is great as well. Not just because I went on there. It's great for other reasons too. But, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Brett. And definitely in the new year, I'll have you on Genuine Chit-Chat as well. So we can have a big old conversation about podcasting in general and some of the other things that you love outside of Marvel Marvel and Star Wars stuff. But it's always great hearing your input and hearing sort of your thoughts on this and also all of the Marvel shows and whatnot and anything else. So it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Same. Thank you, man.
No worries at all.